So today what we're talking about is the keys to success. Somebody tell me the exact wording. It's something like success, isn't it? How you find it, what it is, how to live a successful life. That's what it is. So that's a lovely idea to talk about, because it really is the heart of what all of us are trying to do. So to spend a little time really examining that more clearly and add to it the timeless wisdom of the ages would be a good idea, because, to put it mildly, our society is very confused, extremely confused. It just really, we don't quite know which way is forward at this time. And those of us with a little more awakening, awareness of the possibilities, it would be helpful for us to get more and more clear what we're doing. The difficulty is, you see, what Yogananda came to bring, what Kriyananda offered, is not really for the present, it's for the future. Meaning, but that's how all great movements start. Many movements that 50 or 100 years ago were very prominent, all of those things are beginning to drift down. Especially now, times change so radically that which was revolutionary and exciting, it has become ordinary and then even has moved a little bit into the background. Since I've been involved now with this, what Swami Kriyananda has done for 50 years, that's a long time. And so I can see where we used to be on the edge, that society has moved into the center, so now it's necessary for us to move over. This is how change happens. Everybody's spinning according to one sort of universal idea. And I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking in broad generalizations. Society is accepting a certain set of values. Usually a small group of people, usually with a strong visionary at the center of it, begins to create a vortex here. And if that vortex is in tune with the future, then gradually the mainstream moves into that vortex. And that vortex becomes mainstream. Vegetarianism, meditation, yoga. But now you see, we think it's normal, because all of society is moving in this direction. So we're here to clarify ourselves. Are we just going to float with the tide? Is the tide heading anywhere that we want to go? Or do we hear a kind of clarion call for a more uplifted and different way to live? Certainly that was my life story. And as I said, in an unusual, not replicatable way, but the vibration that called me and the possibility of change that called me, universal and without any limitations on time or place. Music not only reflects consciousness, but it also creates it, which is very important in the context of what I'm going to be talking about, because we are always absorbing from the world around us, from the thoughts, the actions, and to a very large extent from the music. We are picking up a certain definition of reality, of consciousness, of the purpose of life, of what our feelings should be. And we need to become more and more conscious of what those influences are, lest we simply get subconsciously drawn along without really knowing what we're doing. But this is the world that we're living in, where there's so many different choices you have, and with the increase of social media and the internet, the positive effect is what I was saying earlier, which is everywhere I go in the world now, and I have traveled a great deal, people are just coming up. I'm so glad to meet you in person. There's a woman in Iran who translates everything that I do into Persian. There's this whole Persian channel where there's all these subtitles. I met her in the way the world is, I met her in India. She just went back and took it upon herself to do it. I mean, that's just one very small example. Everybody's finding their wavelength. And it's not a question of geography anymore or of good karma. I mean, the possibility of being in the right place at the right time in a unique way, although that's always true. It's just if you're looking for that right vibration. So when we start talking about, how to have a successful life, there's a few other questions that have to be asked way before that. And the first one is, what is a successful life? And why do we think Our definition of success, where did it come from? What do we do and why do we do it? Even the word success, where does that come from? What is life? Why is it that we don't live forever? Why do we die? Why do we age? What is it that we're supposed to be doing here? And one has to have the creative imagination to not be afraid of that answer. I've discovered that a great deal of the time, people do not allow themselves to admit how they feel or to think clearly about situations because they are afraid of what they would have to do if they allowed themselves to know. And so I found it very helpful to realize those are two different decisions. How I feel and what I do after I know what I feel. You have to go step one and then step two. Merely becoming aware does not compel any particular action until you decide. So really examining the quality of my life and what is it supposed to be and why am I here, and at the end of it, what do I want? It doesn't mean that immediately you have to divorce your spouse and put your children up for adoption and walk out of the house in your bare feet. You don't have to do any of that. This brings us to the whole tradition of Eastern teachings of yoga, that life has a purpose, and that purpose is the journey from ignorance to enlightenment. And ignorance is just simply not understanding how this world works and why. Because we're born into physical bodies, our senses are pointed outward, we're very motivated by the experiences we have of our senses, we feel very protective of this body because we know it's fragile, and we feel very inclined to try to please it. And I don't mean in an overextended way, but and so we want things to be comfortable. And we think that easy and pleasurable is the way to go. So the more money we have, the more friends we have, the more secure the home is. All of the things that you list, they're all, that's our definition of what it is to have a victorious life, is if you have your little castle and you hold it. Death, however, has a very interesting effect on that idea. But of course, when you're young, you don't know that you're going to be old. But the real purpose is to refine our consciousness, because there is that fact that life ends. But it's not life that ends, it's the physical body that ends. I'm not going to try to persuade you, just Google near-death experiences. And you just move right on. And you are just annoyingly and astonishingly and breathtakingly wonderfully still there. And you just move into another dimension, which is the one you're in when you don't have a body. And we hang out in the one without a body for a while until we're ready. We need another body because we're not finished on the process of learning the nature of reality. Okay, dharma is that which gradually expands your consciousness. Because that's what victory is. Where there is dharma, there is victory. If we are really working to expand our consciousness. And the fun thing about that is that it's everybody's individual story. It's just, what do I not yet know? Do I need to be more courageous? Do I need to be more self-controlled? Do I need to be more uninhibited? Do I need to have more imagination? Do I need to rein my imagination in? Just because every one of us, we're all trying to move to the center of our own reality, and it just depends on where we are. So where there's dharma, there is victory, because victory is change of consciousness. Because if we think, I'll just behave good, and then it's going to come out the way I want, I wish that were true. There was a very poignant story of a Ecuadorian football team. I think they were, or Uruguay, perhaps. Anyway, the plane crashed in the Andes. And for the first little bit of time, some of you may know the story, it's from some decades ago. For the first little bit of time, they had a radio that was still operating. They crashed in the snow in the Andes. Many people were killed immediately, but not all of them. And there was one man who was the captain of the team who was a very spiritual person, but very orthodox in his Catholicism. And so for the beginning days, he remained the natural leader because he was convinced they'd been good Catholics and therefore God would save them, because dharma was following the rules and victory was not to die. And so for a while, they could hear that they were being searched for. But then at a certain point, the radio announced to them that the search was over. They just assumed everyone was dead. As soon as he found out that God wasn't going to rescue him in the way he expected to be rescued, within half a day he was dead. Because that was his idea of victory, was that I get what I want. And God will give it to me because I've been a good boy. And if you wanted to find dharma a certain way and you wanted to find victory a certain way, that's a match. And the rest of the story, there's a book and a movie, and it's really very inspiring if you like that kind of thing, which I fed myself on things like that for many years. But a group of them survived. But they survived on a totally different understanding than this poor man who had it shattered. So if we really want to be successful in our lives, we have to set up a criteria for what dharma and what victory is and what success is that is not going to be so easily dismantled by the uncontrollable events of the world. Because really, we have so little control. One of the earliest aphorisms I heard from Swami Kriyananda back in 69 or whenever it was, he said, change is the only certainty in life. He said, most people don't like change. Thus, most people are unhappy. Because you can declare reality with all your energy, but you don't have the capacity really to change it. Death, disease, old age. That's what caused the Buddha, who was destined to be a great, powerful king, and his father was doing everything he could to protect him from knowledge of what life was really like. Because the prophecy at his birth was he would be a great king. Would he be a king of the spirit, or would he be a king of the world? And so his father, being a king of the world, wanted him to be a king of the world. So he didn't want him to know. So as the story goes, they built a huge pleasure garden, and everything in it was always fresh and new. Even the flowers were removed before they wilted. And nobody who wasn't beautiful and young was ever allowed. And then he broke out of it, and he saw old age, disease, and death. And then he said, why are we living the way we're living? Why are we all just pretending that we can just make this party and it'll never stop? And then he walked away and became the Buddha. Otherwise, we would never have heard him again. So the choice is, and I'm making the choice really big. That doesn't mean that your life has to look as different as mine did. You don't have to make the same kind of changes I did. But what is dharma for you, and what is victory? Because a great deal of the time we make the wrong decisions because we don't have a clear idea of what we're doing. That was me before I met Swami Kriyananda. He himself, and then as I gradually learned it, all the things I'm telling you just resonated with my readiness to learn it. This is what's so interesting. When I very first got on this path, before I met Swami and got more practical, I was reading these Indian books about renunciation and just giving up everything and wandering off, Sri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Ram, like this. And for some reason, often the idea of giving up all desires seems really attractive. It's not, but it seems really attractive. So I tried to persuade a friend of mine to get on this path by explaining to her, have you ever noticed that when you want something and then you finally get it, that after a while it doesn't fulfill you in the same way? And I'm going step by step, and she's going, yes, I understand. I'm thinking I'm my first convert, number one, like this. And then she said, that's true, desires can be very disappointing. That's why it's so important always to want new things. Which is, God bless her, how she lived the rest of her life. Just chasing one after another. But that's not dharma, because it doesn't lead. It's not paying attention to your own experience and deciding. When I met Swamiji and when I learned these teachings, the word pole star is the word I use. Sometimes people refer to Jesus or Christianity. It's a very powerful word, and it changed everything, because I began to understand what dharma is, I began to understand what victory is. And it was an unmoving point in the horizon. Now, my life, this is very interesting to me. Ever since I was a child, I realized in retrospect, I basically had the same values. But as I grew older and had more life experience, the form in which I expressed those values began to change a great deal. But a number of years ago, where the community I'm part of now, in the temple that we have, it's quite near Stanford University. Ironically, I've just never gotten very far away from that spot. In fact, literally, the temple we have is across the street from the near edge of the campus. So there was a very bright, lovely woman who was a student at the university who became interested in what we were doing. Simultaneously, she had a great many desires that she wanted fulfilled, not bad desires, but she wanted to marry, she wanted to have children, she wanted a certain career. No objections at all. But because I didn't follow that path, she was afraid that anybody who followed the path had to look like me, and that made her nervous. So she asked me this question. She said, I was about 50 at that time, probably twice her age. She said, are you happy? I mean, that's a reasonable question, because my quest on the spiritual path was a quest for happiness. Everybody's life is a quest for happiness. So I said, yeah, but I said, that's not really a very good question. Because most people, not because the question isn't good, but it's hard to get an honest answer from people. Because often people will say they're happy because there's nothing miserable going on. But what they actually define as happiness is not an ever-expanding, untainted bliss in the presence of God. It's just that things could be worse. And so you call that happiness. It's just a faint compromise. I said, I'll tell you something else. I said, the form of my ideals have shifted repeatedly. For example, I always thought I would be the mother of many children. My work when I was young, I worked with children in summer camp. I taught swimming. I helped run a children's theater program. This is all before I was 20. And that was my whole interest. And motherhood has always been to me a very noble profession. And I just assumed that I have lots of children. I've never even been pregnant. Now I'm used to it, and it's perfectly fine. But it was so strong in me. But when I met Swami Kriyananda and began to understand the spiritual path, I realized what I wanted. One, I wanted to do meaningful work. And I thought raising children was meaningful work. And I was just before women felt they could be both a mother and have a career. So for me, motherhood was the whole story. But what I thought I could have by raising children was to be tangibly helpful. And that was the best thing I could think of to do. When I understood the nature of these teachings, I suddenly realized that I could be so much more helpful if I were not committed to having to take care of one or two or three or four. That it was perfectly good work, but it was not my work. But it was the same impulse, but it just turned in another, almost overnight. My lifelong ambition just completely turned into something else. So I said to her, and that's only one example, there are many others, but I said to her, in all my years of being on the spiritual path, I've never had to compromise my ideals. I've always been able to act according to the highest principles that I understand within myself, in a practical way, because the second principle of Ananda is you have to be practical in your idealism. Because if you're just insisting on something that is not, in any way, you're just insisting that everybody live at the top of the mountain, and you're insisting that you live at the top of the mountain when you're actually camped at the bottom of the hill, because that's really who you are. That's not being very practical. And so you never have victory because you're always working with what isn't really happening. I said, very few people can say that. And I don't say that with pride. I'm just saying that you have to have a subtle understanding of dharma, and you have to be practical in your idealism, and then you can move forward. Because this is a dual world. There's no absolute values. Everything is directional. So you constantly make a decision moving in the right direction. And the practicality is, what am I really capable of? I might dream that I can do this or dream that I can do that. But who am I really? What am I really capable of? And one of my favorite personal mantras is, I'm not that good. It's just as simple as that. I spent years of my life constantly failing because I made sure my idea of not compromising, of being true to Dharma, was to pretend that I was somebody that I'm not. And, if I had been Mary Magdalene, maybe I could have followed that. But hey, surprise, surprise, I'm not. So the practicality is, which way is forward for me? And the other part of it is, you don't bring the mountain down. You don't get scared because the goal is so high. Many years ago, way back when all of this was starting, there was a magazine in the U.S. called Psychology Today. I don't know if it still exists or not. And they published an article. I think it was Psychology. It might have even been Yoga Journal. But it published an article called The Dark Side of Meditation. And since we were the leaders on the lunatic fringe, we were very curious just to see what they would say about it. And our assumption was that it would be garbage, that just somebody would be making something up who knew nothing about meditation, but it wasn't. It was very good. This was the story. Because meditation was beginning to get a reputation as being a good way to relieve stress, and, it was good for your health, it was good for your heart, all those different things, so that many very competitive, type A, really all-out people were taking up meditation because they were trying to balance it. But if the meditation had a spiritual element, you were going for God realization. You were going to become perfect. Okay? But the space between starting meditation and becoming perfect was enough to drive all the type A personalities crazy. This was the dark side of meditation. And I actually saw that. And I never succumbed to it, but I've seen it a lot. That you set an impossible standard for yourself, you can't reach it, and you quit the whole story. This is not Dharma. This does not lead to victory. A woman friend of mine confessed to me that even though the promise of her practice was that she would meditate morning and night, she really wasn't any good at it. And so she confessed to me that she was hardly ever meditating. But I knew for a fact, because she was part of our community in our temple, that she was always present on Sunday mornings for the meditation on Sunday morning. And she was actually very active in our community. She was very in tune with what we were doing. She just didn't have the discipline to meditate. I said, but every Sunday morning you're there meditating. She said, yes. I said, so you meditate regularly. And she did. She meditates regularly. And that's the truth. And that's a victory she can claim. That's her dharma. To sort of try to be somebody that she wasn't is not going. You have to be practical in your idealism. And this is how we remain faithful to what we know to be true, but we also remain realistic about who we actually are. And the odd thing about all of this, again, because I've been in this for a long time, and because of the community, because of the role that I've been given, I've met hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of people by now, and hundreds of people that I've seen over half a century. And the people who can't accept the reality of themselves, who try to live out somebody else's dharma, do not end up victorious. But the least impressive, the smallest, most unnoticed people just put one foot in front of the other without quitting. So the first thing, the fundamental thing for it to have a successful life is to ask myself, deeply, sincerely, when no one else is around, who am I really? And that is the single most important thing, because you cannot be, you see, all of it is about truth. That's the pole star. It's not Yogananda's teachings, not Kriyananda's teachings, it's not our Lord Jesus Christ, whom I also love. It's not any of that. It's just that which is. Just what's true. And once we stand, and one of Yogananda's most advanced disciples, Sister Gyanamata, this was her suggestion. She said, ask yourself what you absolutely know to be true. Not what you've heard somebody clever say, not what you read in a book, but who would you be when nobody is looking and nobody can judge you? And what do you absolutely know is true? And she said, and no matter how far you have to back up from all of that you're imagining, she said, find that point of unshakable sincerity. And then build your life from that. Because then, no matter what happens, it can never be taken away from you, you see? And this is relating to our overall arching topic. Death itself can't take it away from you. Sickness, disease, disappointment, betrayal. What do I absolutely know is true? And then you can grow from there, because you're on a foundation. You're not standing here and trying to live there. And then also, so much is possible, because all your power is together. All your power is focused. Isn't that a wonderful prospect? This is what I was telling my friend from Stanford, And of course that makes me happy. That doesn't make me happy every day. What I mean is, even though we do wear bright colored clothes and sing happy songs, the reason we do it is so that we can deeply within ourselves have faith. Not just faith in I can do it, but faith that I'm part of a greater reality and this is my destiny unfolding. God made me exactly the way He is, and He likes me the way I am. I'll tell you one more piece and then we'll take a short break. One of the fundamental principles of Sanatana Dharma, which is the teachings of India that I'm representing here, which is not Hinduism, which is the perception of the sages through the ages. It's the teachings of Jesus, of Krishna, of Buddha. They all saw the same reality. Great avatars, great saints, great masters become that way because they've been exactly through the same process we have. And Christianity has that one slightly confused. You have to go to the Bhagavad Gita to get it right. But there was a time when the individual who incarnated as Yogananda or as Buddha or as Krishna or as Jesus was not yet enlightened. Yogananda made this statement, which I shared, and I don't know where I said it, but Yogananda said he remembered his individuality back to the level of a diamond, which is, I cannot say anything more about that. I wanted to ask Swami Kriyananda more about it, but he didn't think it was a useful question, so he didn't answer. What would you do with that information, he asked. I asked him, how long are you a diamond and what do you become next? And it was basically, even if I knew and could tell you, how would that help you? But the point is, every single stage of awakening from ignorance to enlightenment, these masters have been through. So it's not just that, oh yeah, you poor ignorant baby, like that. It's that they know. So when we have to back up, and this is all that we can sincerely say, and you pray to God in whatever form or whatever master you're attuned to help you, it's not merely that He feels sorry for you. I imagine these guys all talking to each other, and I think of Yogananda or Swami Kriyananda. They look at me in the cloud of confusion I'm in, and he says, "Oh yeah, I remember that one." It's like, this is what we do. So there's nothing wrong with where we're standing. We can move forward from here. Where there's dharma, there's victory. If we're making our decisions in accordance with the pole star that we understand with sincere humility, the masters will just take us to our next step. And the next step is often extremely uninteresting. We want it to be super dramatic. Can't I sell everything and just walk off? No. You have to just get up and go to work tomorrow. Ugh. that's dharma for you, whatever it might be. But success is guaranteed. Where there is dharma, there is victory. The method is to be practical in your idealism.